Hey guys, what's going on? Adam Menner, Varsity House Gym, Business of Strength. So in part 2 of our free speed series here at Varsity House, I'm gonna lay out a proven framework that we use. This is a little bit of a longer video, but it entails every single process, all 1 through 5 steps that you guys can literally steal and use for yourself. And so we talk about the framework that we use over the course of a 13-week block here at Varsity House Gym. And you guys can go through that process. Make sure you pause, take notes, because there's a lot of meat in here. So if you have any questions or comments, let us know. I'll get back to you guys as soon as possible, and we'll make sure that you guys fully understand the material so it can help us you and your training business. Thanks again. Enjoy. The 5-step proven process here at Varsity House Gym. We've created a 5-step proven process that has elicited an average improvement of 8.4% across 5 separate testing categories every 13 weeks for the last 5 years. And we talked about this in the VH internal study. So if you guys have any questions or you'd like to go through there, you can check that out there as well. But this proven process, again, is what's worked for us, and we're trying to share the results with you guys. So we're extremely excited to deep dive each process here. Testing. So we have a series of tests here. With testing, it's important to note what do you have access to? What do you have available? What are you capable of in terms of technology? What can you use? What do you feel comfortable with? And what is your process for doing so? In our 5 principles of speed development, section 5, data, Jacob talked about how we go about managing our data. And so we have a few ad libs here in terms of we're going to show you examples of things that we have done, but we want to make sure that you guys understand the basis of testing parameters and how you guys can apply these testing parameters to your own business to help organize your training systems. Step number 1, intake and onboard. Everything must be accounted for if you want to create a holistic training program that ensures results. So here's an example of our onboard process, and I'm going to break down extensively our assessment process here. This is an example of an intake that we did for Adidas for their flagship program, the Jayhawks. And we had a bunch of different athletes here. I believe on that day we had 33 athletes. But we got their weight, their height, their wingspan, their reach. So these were some of their anthropometrics. But we added them to the database that we use, or the platform we use, called Fusion Sport. Because Fusion Sport, you can run a whole host of tests, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But here at Varsity House Gym, we take the anthropometrics because we know we need to load them into the Fusion Sport. For you, maybe anthropometrics are not that important unless you utilize them extensively in your program. But remember, the deeper down the rabbit hole that you get, the more that you're going to have to teach it to your staff, the more you're going to have to teach it to others unless you're a one-man shop. So we use anthropometrics because we need them in our Fusion Sport for our speed testing. But this example here, this image, as you can see, is an example of our athlete assessment. It's pretty extensive. We talked about in the aforementioned section, stress, why this matters in terms of collecting as much information as possible. You see here, we have step 1, the discovery phase. This is just a conversation. We sit them down in the room that I'm in right now. We put them on our in-body. If you do not have access to an in-body, you don't put them on the in-body, but you should still go through these steps. Discovery phase, where they are, what brought them in, what's their past experience in regards to training. Step 2, we said the in-body, but you can nix it if you don't have it. Step 3 is their training history, right? What's your current training history? What are some major training limitations, surgeries, pathologies, maybe just different ailments that are going to inhibit you from doing everything that you would be able to do here? What do you enjoy doing? That is something that most people don't ask, because objectively you would say, well, this is how we do it. I'm going to get you to do what we do. No. I need to meet you where you are, and I'm going to form our training system around you, not plug you into our training system. Remember, yes, it's a process. It's the same for everybody, but you make adjustments based upon who the individual is. Now, here's something super important. We go through our stress questionnaire. So it's different supplements that they may be taking. We have an in-house nutritionist who reveals the supplements. So us as coaches, if I don't feel comfortable reviewing a certain supplement, I'm going to outsource that to our RD who is here in-house. So for you guys, if you don't feel comfortable administering the best advice in regards to supplement intake, don't be afraid to outsource. That is something that I can't express enough. You don't know everything, so don't be afraid to outsource and do those types of things. Number 2, energy level, right? A stress scale. How are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10? I feel like crap, I'm a 3. Well, then that's gonna matter, right? That's gonna matter a lot. I feel great, I feel 10. Okay, well, how can we justify your energy level? Well, let's look at your sleep. Let's look at your sleep. Let's look at your stress, right? On a stress level from 1 to 5, how do you feel? How many hours of night do you get sleep? How many hours of sleep do you get a night? Right? Work. Do you have a sedentary job? Do you have an active job? Those are all different things that play a role into developing a training program, because I know if I have an individual, an athlete who works at a desk, maybe their other job, if they're in college, is very sedentary, well, when they come in here, I know that they're going to need a little bit more of a warm-up, or they're going to need a little bit more of movement variability before we get going into our training. If I'm working with an athlete who's moving around all the time, well, then I'm going to have to adjust for that in our training program. Our end, on a coach's accountability, we have different metrics here that are set up in terms of checking back in with energy levels, checking back in with sleep and stress. And so we call this a success session. That is an extremely important process in your evaluation. Step 2, this is our movement assessment. So here we have 3 different sections. We have an aerobic assessment. Right? An aerobic assessment is important because of what we mentioned in the energy system development. I want to see aerobically, where are you? And the times on here don't truly matter or aren't truly relevant to the energy system being used in terms of oxidative. They tap in a little bit. It's kind of glycolytic, but it's also just to see your work capacity, right? Looking objectively, what is one's work capacity as it pertains to their ability to do the tasks that you're going to have them do in the gym. So we organize our athletes, and you'll see this in our categorization section, between novice, intermediate, and advanced. And what makes a novice, intermediate, advanced, we'll talk about that in that section. But in novice, so our aerobic tests, a 3K Concept 2 bike. If you don't have access to a Concept 2 bike, pick a simple aerobic test. It could be a tempo run. It could be a light prowler push. Right? It could be something on the stairs, but remember, keep the intensity relatively lower, because this is still an opportunity for you to discover and ask more questions about these individuals to gather some more information. Then, are they novice, intermediate, advanced with their aerobic assessment? Section 3, a movement assessment. So there's 2 parts here, respiration series and full movement warm-up. Now, here's what's important. You see I have in parentheses, build into routine. At Varsity House here, we have all athletes perform a basic stationary warm-up that's a series of checks and balances to see how they're feeling. This is not deep diving the nervous system, respiration mechanics, gait mechanics, although we're going to talk about that in a little bit. This is simply a way to build in habits into the routine, so when athletes come in and work with us, they know to go roll around for a little bit, they know to do some tissue work, they know to do some breathing work before we actually get going. We're trying to build in ownership into them and accountability when athletes walk inside our doors. So part of our respiration series here are all 4s rock back breathing. So this is a simple respiration drill that we just want to see during our assessment. How well can I expand air in all 4 cavities? Anteriorly, posteriorly, and laterally, right? And we need to know, can they not expand their ribs laterally? Can they not expand their cavity anteriorly and get air into the front of their body, posteriorly into the air in their body? Well, why does this matter? We're going to explain when we go into our section 4 movement here. Now, full moving warm-up. If you've been coaching and you're in the trenches, you don't need to know a lot. So a simple squat and turn, an overhead reverse lunge, a Cossack lunge, a backwards 2-point RDL, ankle cradle, walking spider. These are simple drills that require coordination, that require a little bit of technical aspects. And so if you're going to look at this individual, we still have the category, novice, intermediate, advanced. Can they perform that moving warm up Maybe not at all. They're a novice because they have bad coordination. They have a lot of caving in with their knees. There's just a lot of different things that are going on that I know if I was to load up that pattern, it may or may not be better. Now, overhead reverse lunges, all of these different movements as an intermediate, you can perform this warm up to par. So it looks pretty good, but there's some things that we could address. Advanced, you excel in this warm-up. So your squat and turn looks good, you have some rhythm to your overhead reverse lunge looks good, you have good stability, good step back, good coordination, so forth and so on with all the other exercises. So you can see during this assessment process, we are beginning to categorize these individuals as novice, intermediate, and advanced. And this is going to allow us to create the best training program for them. As we move on, our specific movement series. Over the course of the last 2 to 3 years, we have adopted some principles from PRI, the Postural Restoration Institute, because I truly believe as the director of training here as a partner, that is the best strategy immediately to alleviate some type of pain or some type of compensation. Now, we talked about this in the stress section. It is not always the case. Some individuals, if I am working with a youth athlete or somebody that hasn't experienced a lot of stress, I am going to skip this section entirely, right? I'm going to need to use my coach's eye. But if I know this individual is coming in, I know that once I've done the discovery and success session, that they have prior experience training, that they've trained at other facilities, that they're about a high school, college, or pro athlete, I know that I'm going to have to need to see some of these specific movement patterns because they're going to present themselves in training. Yes, training is an ever-going assessment, but if I could alleviate some things right off the bat, I'm going to go ahead and do so. So we have an upper body and a lower body. For our upper body, this correlates with our respiration strategies. I'm going to have the individual lie on their back, relax, put their arm at 90 degrees. As they sit back this way, I'm going to have them exhale all of their air, pull their rib cage down and relax. They're going to internally rotate their hand to the ground. Can they get their hand all the way to the ground and past almost 180 degrees? If not, not past 180 degrees. So if they can get their hand all the way to the ground here from a starting position, then yes, they have it, right? So you can see with their left arm, a plus means they can, a minus means no. So I'm going to do an internal rotation test and an external rotation test. Well, why would I test these? Going back to our respiration strategies. If I know I can't internally rotate, I know probably anteriorly underneath my serratus and my pec major that there's probably something going on. I can't expand air into the ribs. So I know that maybe I'm not going to have a lot of good shoulder flexion or overhead shoulder mobility because I'm looking at proximal stability of the thorax and the rib cage. Now, when the opposite happens and we get external rotation, what I'm looking for is posterior stability. And can I get air, posteriorly into my lats, into my rhomboids? Can I get my scapula to expand, right? Because I know I need a concave scapula on a concave rib cage. That's extremely important in terms of full shoulder health and shoulder movement. However, if I can't get full external rotation or I can't get full internal rotation, 2 subsequent things matter. Number 1, shoulder health, but number 2, performing tasks such as sprinting, right? I know I need arm drive. I know I need reciprocal inhibition. If I can't get external or internal rotation somewhere throughout my arm drive, I know that there's going to be a limitation. Maybe I can't get full extension during the start of my sprint, so I'm not going to have enough counterbalance forces to apply while my body moves kinematically during acceleration. The second thing is I know in the weight room, there's going to be certain movements that are going to inhibit me or further add to this stress and layer of compensation. So I know that I'm not going to be able to bench or I'm not going to be able to overhead press completely because there's some dissociation. There's not an ability for me to get air into the ribs. There's not an ability for me to get my head into full shoulder flexion above my body. So those things are going to present themselves. That's what we are looking for in the assessment here. And if we go to a deep dive, we have a quick biomechanics section where we're just going to talk about pelvic anatomy and then a little bit of compensation upper body wise. But like I mentioned in this resource, this is not a biomechanics course. This is a complete VH health and performance model and system to help you guys build your training system and business. Now for a lower body, why did we pick these tests? So a lying straight leg, an active knee bend, a straight leg ground touch, and a functional squat. So I'm looking at pelvic anatomy here. right? One of the most common compensations that we see and in the PRI community is what's called a left AIC pattern, an anterior-interior chain pattern. So for this test, I'm gonna have the individual lie completely on their back. They're gonna exhale all of their air, they're gonna bring their ribs down, and they're gonna straighten out. While they straighten out, I'm gonna have them keep their left knee straight, and they're gonna slowly try to raise their right leg. So this is a lying straight leg test. Here, I'm looking for a few things. Number one, I'm looking for how far can they get their leg past 180 degrees of hip flexion. Why? Because then I can see that maybe they don't have any type of pelvic dissociation. So maybe on the right side, they don't have internal rotation of the femur. On that side, that interiorly the ilium is pulled down a little bit, so they can't get a full straight leg raise bend. I'm looking for the second thing, straight leg, I'm sorry, not bend. On the second side, I'm looking for that left leg. Is that left leg more an external rotation while the right is an internal rotation? So as the right leg begins to raise, does the left leg begin to compensate and expand a lot? So if I see those things beginning to happen, I know that I'm going to need to address them, right? I know that I'm going to need to address them. And we're going to talk about that in the pelvic section as well. For the lying active knee bend, in a second point on this lying straight leg test, it also allows you to see posterior compression. So tight hamstrings, tight glutes, tight obliques as well. This can contribute to psoas or hip flexor pain if they can't swing their leg all the way forward. This can also affect you in terms of all your other tasks, your squat, your sprinting, and your jumping. Because you can't take that muscle or that joint through a full range of motion to generate as much power and speed that you're looking for. The active knee bend. This is again another test. Can I get the knee past 90 degrees of hip flexion? So I'm lying straight on the ground. I'm trying to drive my knee all the way back. I'm looking for the exact same thing. Maybe this individual is hypermobile, so they can get that right or left pelvis all the way and the knee almost tucks while that opposite leg remains straight. If they can't get it all the way past, this could be a host of factors. Hip flexor issue, low back pain, oblique spinae erecti, and on that opposite side, the same compensation could occur. I could have more external rotation on that left side, right? More external rotation on that left side. Again, please refer to the biomechanics section of the pelvis to deep dive these a little bit more. Straight leg ground test. This is again, they're gonna straight leg ground toe touch test, I should say. They're gonna stand up straight. They're gonna make sure that they keep their toes together, exhale all of the air, keeping their knees straight. They're gonna try to touch their toes with their palms. And as they come down, I'm looking posteriorly what is happening here. Do I see a right or left hip hike? Do I see that they can't even touch their toes? In their spine, is there some type of compensation? Maybe because I stall with their upper body test, they have zero external rotation, so there's no air getting into the back of the body, so the spine is exemplifying a little bit of lordosis. And so these are things that we're looking for more in terms of what is my end ranges, what are some of my movement that I can possibly get into. Lastly is a functional squat. The functional squat is just a test to see what are your squat capabilities. Can you get to 90 degrees of hip flexion without rounding your lower back? So this is our movement assessment here. Again, we are looking for our aerobic capacity, our movement individuality in terms of how well do they move, the respiration series, and then we're looking for our specific movement compensations. And now with this information, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but what do we do with this information that we have? The next part of our assessment is our speed and jump profile. And I put simple here because there's two parts to this. Number one, you have to remember, what do you have access to? So our sprint prep sequence here, we have our posture and pattern push and our sprint warm-up sequence. We have different exercises. Part of our postures are overhead march, hands on hips double leg march, opposite hand and leg march. What's going on, coaches and athletes? If you guys are enjoying this video, we have a ton of more content for free for you guys available. If you are an athlete, we have what's called our Athlete VH Performance Code. This is a free 13-week program that we've utilized here.
body weight, no equipment, adheres to real training principles. If you are a coach and you want to learn more about how we put together the training systems and implement the training principles that are taught on this channel, we have our free VH Speed and Performance System. This is exactly the breakdown and the layout that we use here for training athletes, as well as some stuff in there, as well as how we train adults in our training program as well. So you guys can find those two free resources. And if you're extremely interested in what we do, we also have our 5 steps to a results-driven training model. This is a paid product, but this is over deliver. We gave a cool talk on July 8th of this past year, and you guys can find all of that information below. So right back to the video. We appreciate you guys.
So for these exercises, what we're looking for specifically is I'm just looking for your sprint mechanics. I'm looking for coordination. I'm looking for technique. I'm looking for front side, backside mechanics. But most importantly, I'm looking at where does this individual bleed power. Now for their pattern we're looking at exchanges, double exchanges, A marches and B marches, or B walks we should say. Here, it's all about coordination. Where, again, does this individual feel the most comfortable? So during some pattern work, if they can't get that pattern down, I know that that's something that I need to put into their warm-ups. Why? Back to our neuroplasticity. I'm trying to build in specific skill sets to help develop coordination and foundational skills that we can build upon down the road. If they don't have good posture, they don't have good pattern, what now is going to happen is if I begin to immediately insert them into a program, I'm putting them at a chance of getting injured, right? Or I'm increasing the probability of them getting injured by putting them into a program that I didn't take the due diligence, or I didn't take the time and the due diligence, I should say, to look at these things. Now, push here. You could call this push, you could call this torque, you could call this power, you could call this impulse, you could call it whatever you would like. This is just a simple ability for me to see how powerful an individual is without testing. Power skips. Do they have some explosive ability, or can they not really get off the ground? For their power skips for distance, do they have good horizontal power, horizontal trajectory, or not? 90-90 athletic jumps, or 90-90 jumps to an athletic stance. This is down on the ground from a 90-90 position. When they jump up, how high do they get from a disadvantageous position, Can they jump up as high as they can? Can they overcome gravity? Can they land athletically? So this is a natural, or I should say objective coach's viewpoint of looking at, do they have good posture? Do they have good pattern? Do they have good push? Right? Because all of these things, all of these movements will tell you a story in regards to, are they really efficient? And again, how we categorize them: novice, intermediate, and advanced. Right? So novice, intermediate, advanced. Can they not perform it at all? Okay, that's something to work on. Do they have a good understanding of it? Okay. Are they very advanced? Maybe they have experience sprinting and are working with a well-versed coach. And then lastly here, as we move on to the next section under push, we have our sprint warm-up sequence. The sprint warm-up sequence is something I see not enough done. Or I should say, I don't see it enough done the right way. We test all of our sprints from a 2-point. We're just warming up in volume. We were just warming up in intensity. So a 2-point sprint, 2 by 5 yards at 50% effort. A 2-point sprint, 2 by 5 yards at 75% effort. A 2-point sprint, 2 by 5 at 100% effort. So I'm building in volume in terms of distance. I'm building in intensity in terms of how much effort is exerted per sprint. I'm not just going to have them get on the line and run a 100% sprint through 10. I need to gradually build into it. One of our programming principles we're going to talk about. And here, you'll just be able to see, again, objectively, are they pretty fast? Do they move? Maybe I'm going to time it with a stopwatch. So when looking at these things, it's extremely important to understand you need to be objective. You need a standard for everything that you do. This is a simple process that we've implemented here because we know we put speed at the forefront. Now, step 3, speed and jump profiling. It's important to note, if you don't have access technology, this is irrelevant. But if you'd like to deep dive this a little bit more, then this is something that would be a very useful tool for you. So we use the G-Flight, and we also have a jump mat. But the G-Flight is a very inexpensive tool used, and we use on the G-Flight an RSI test, a reactive strength index, as a predictor of speed deficiencies. Here's how it works. So we took some of the numbers here from Carl Valley, and talking with Carl Valley on an article he wrote a couple years ago, how he uses RSI as a very simple means of seeing where this individual is deficient. And so you could also use this as a power deficiency test. But here's how it works, and here's how we implement it at the gym. We have them perform that reactive strength index, and we also perform an RSI readiness test before our training sessions as well. And Coach Jacob is going to talk about that in the data section. But here's the RSI. Here's a good standard of categorization. 2.0 or less, 2.0 to 2.5, 2.5 to 3.0, and then greater than 3.0. Now, there's 3 separate physical qualities that we're looking for to see if they excel or if they have a deficiency. In strength, in power, and in speed. So going through these RSIs, if somebody has a less than 2.0 RSI, looking at each 3 categories, here's what you should be looking for. Under strength, you need to focus on max strength because you need to develop force. You need to develop strength potential. This is going to be the number 1 determining factor of improving one's power output and one's ability to reproduce power, also known as a reactive strength index. Now, looking at power, you might need to clean up technically jump mechanics. I'm not a big fan of saying you need to jump a certain way because different guys jump differently depending on anthropometrics, depending on what's worked for them. But ultimately, you can clean up some wasted motion that you see in the vertical jump. So when you look at different things, maybe you're going for a max approach jump and you're looking at a penultimate. If somebody takes too little or too many steps, well, that's going to affect how force is redirected into the ground and vertically to perform the test well. So if someone has a low RSI, poor force output, remember, developing their force, developing their strength potential, and then improving the technicality of their ability to perform that particular task, a jump, you're going to improve their power ultimately in their RSI. Now, sprinting, teaching acceleration, right? Something that's important is understanding acceleration. Acceleration is improving one's peak force output in as minimal space as possible. And we call this the start of the sprint or your acceleration. So for here, if you improve max force, it corresponds to improving acceleration. And then this improves to cleaning up one's technique to express their new force and power. So that's what happens with a below 2.0 RSI. Moving on, 2.0 to 2.5. Now here again, we're going to increase max strength. So looking at our strength adjustments, that's still not an elite level RSI, excuse me. So we know that with their strength adjustments, we know that we need to improve and address their max strength a little bit. So we need to increase it to continue to improve their force potential. And we're going to talk about this in the next slide. Now for their power adjustments, we're focusing on force output. So now I know in their programming that I'm going to need to spend time on developing force a little bit. So when you look at the 3 phases of programming, right, our acceleration accumulation, power intensification, and absolute speed realization, what we look at here is now we're going to have to realize, okay, I might need to spend a little bit more time in the power intensification phase. Whereas before, I'm going to need to spend more time in the acceleration accumulation phase, developing max strength, developing acceleration, developing technical capacity. But now here, right, we're focusing, on exercises that are going to allow them to generate the most force, but are also going to have the most impact. Moving on to sprint emphasis. Now we should increase max velocity a little bit. So this is kind of the blend between acceleration and max velocity. Meaning, I know that talking about our gravity and speed, that if I'm picking exercises that are a little bit more forceful, we know that as a sprint continues to go on, that it is more force generated in the ground at further distances, moving at higher velocities. So I need to match that was what I'm trying to increase. So I'm trying to improve my max strength. I'm trying to improve my force output with exercises at higher velocities. And for my increased max velocity, that's going to align all three of those physical qualities trying to be trained. Moving on, now we're moving into a pretty elite category here. So 2.5 to 3.0. Here we're going to address max strength, but it's not as of importance. So max strength now is going to be almost maintained, or we can improve it a little bit, but to what extent, I'm going to talk about in the next slide. Supplemental power adjustments. So for our jump improvement, now we want to increase power. So I apologize, guys, you don't see here. This is increase absolute power, increase intensive power. Because now I want to ensure that I'm pushing the envelope of my RSI. I'm trying to improve my baseline level of power, right? So before, I don't really have it. I need to build the capacity and the power. And as I transition to 2.0, 2.5, I need to improve the velocity at which I'm moving in power. I'm trying to increase the velocity of the power movements that I'm performing. But now when I get to 2.5 and 3.0 for power, I'm trying to increase my absolute intensive power capabilities. So this is where I'm going for max box jumps. This is where I'm going for max vertical jumps, max single hurdle jumps, because I'm trying to improve my absolute power capability to get my power to the next level, or to get my RSI to the next level. For our sprinting emphasis here, we're going to address max velocity, right? Because again, I'm moving with the most force at the highest velocities during my furthest distances. So now that I'm addressing max velocity, I don't need to improve it too much, because I'm going to get that from my intensive jumping and maintaining my strength level. So you can see here, it's all about managing volume. It's all about managing fatigue. But now for our last part here, our 3.0, this is extreme elite category. We've only had 2 athletes ever in here who have had above 3.0 RSI. So now we're just maintaining our max strength. So now we're trying to keep the volume low, intensity is moderate. I don't want to add more fatigue and layer in more fatigue here in our programming. For our power, we're trying to increase elasticity or reactiveness. This is also known as our stiffness. So I'm trying to improve my foot and my whole lower limbs ability to accept force from the ground, whether it's generated from the hip or from the ground, and be able to regenerate power extremely quickly. This is my elastic ability. Now, sprinting emphasis, I need to improve sprinting, and I need to include more sprints. So I need more exposure to max velocity. So here we're going to undulate our days and ensure that they get a lot of frequent exposure to higher speeds to match the ground contact time of improving our elastic power capabilities while maintaining our strength levels. So fatigue is low, intensive plyometrics is out, exposure to max velocity is out, because we are working on the end range of that force velocity curve. So here's an exception to the rule. If you don't have access to a fusion sport, if you don't have access to another technology or another piece of technology where you can monitor force velocity profiling and load velocity profiling, this does not apply to you. Something that we do is really with our high-level collegiate and pro athletes is run true force velocity and load velocity profiles. Part of our assessment and testing parameters. It should be noted that we don't do this all the time. We probably do this 10-20% of the time, if that. We utilize this with our advanced athletes. So whether you're a high-level collegiate or you're a high-level pro, we only utilize a true force velocity profile or a load velocity profile. But I think it's important to understand how to actually perform a load velocity profile, right? And what you're looking for in a load velocity profile is you're looking for 5 key physical qualities. I'm looking for absolute force output measured in newtons per kilogram. I'm looking at my absolute velocity measured in meters per second. I'm looking at my Pmax, also just known as force potential, which is watts per kilogram. I'm looking at my rate of force max. My rate of force max is how quickly can I accelerate and get to max velocity. And then I'm looking at my decreased rate of force, which is essentially how quickly does that force that I've generated drop off. And what you will see is different individuals have different speed profiles based upon a whole host of different factors, whether it's genetics versus it's synapse firing, which is how wired the nervous system is, whether it's contractile tissue, whatever the case may be, different individuals have different physical qualities and they need to be profiled. So when looking at a force velocity profile at the top, here's what you can do. You organize the team. We like to do it by position so we know who that individual is. We do their body weight, they need their height. So this is an example of when we do our intake, why we need the body and the height. So what you do is you set up your training parameters. So you have to have a decent amount of runway, a decent amount of turf space. So when looking at percent, you have 4 separate tests. You're gonna do an unloaded run and with different split times. This first run is your force velocity profile. This is an unrated force velocity profile taken at different splits. So we might do a 20-yard force velocity profile looking at 5 yards, 10 yards, 15, and then 20. At each segment, it's gonna tell us a whole host of different factors. Now, when I do my low velocity profile, right, I need to establish what is the distance used. So here at Varsity House, we don't have athletes run beyond 30 or 40 yards. So my max velocity in which I think somebody can reach top speed is usually a lot shorter than a traditional track athlete. So a track athlete who might run a 55, 60, or 100 meter sprint, their max velocity might not be until 70 and 80 or maybe 60 and 80 yards or meters. So that's gonna factor into your programming, especially when working with team sport athletes. So the way that we like to conduct our force velocity profiling test is we like to give our athletes a 10 to 15 yard buildup when they do their sprints. Now with our 0% load, let's say we're taking a 20-yard sprint. I'm gonna set up my split times at the 10 that goes to the 15 and then the 15 that goes to the 20. So this is gonna be a 10-yard buildup here. So they're gonna sprint all the way through and perform a 20-yard sprint. Now, I'm gonna go through 3 separate loads here. So these loads were determined, Les Spellman, a colleague of mine and a good friend of mine, helped us determine these loads, but we changed them a little bit based upon the results that we were seeing. So this has been over the course of the last 2 years. So then we do 25% load. So they're still gonna have 25% of their body weight on a sled. They're gonna sprint with a 10-yard run-up, and then they're gonna go through the next 10 yards with that 15 split and with that 20 split at 25% load. Then they will perform the same thing at 50% load. They will perform again that sprint at 75% load of their total body weight. And now you'll have different metrics, right? You're gonna have different factors. So you can see here, velocity max percentage of body weight meters per second. That was the first test in blue that we performed. Then, as we perform the 25%, you're gonna see a different body weight meters per second. At 50%, you're gonna see a different meters per second. And then obviously you're gonna see a complete drop off at 75 meters per second. Now, what we are looking for here is we're looking at the optimal load per effort that they need to adhere to in our programming. So I know that if somebody's optimal velocity is at 50% or between 25 and 50%, that is where they're gonna hang out, and we're gonna load this sled up accordingly as we work our way through a program. Now, that profile that we create, we have comparative norms to other players. So now here you'll be able to see, okay, we have an overall score, how do they rank per position, and on the 5 categories that we talked about, force output, maximal velocity, RP max, rate of force max, and decreased rate of force velocity, we can see where they struggle in. So an individual who has a high decreased rate of force probably needs more acceleration and more load for longer distances because they need to be able to accelerate and maintain that acceleration capacity over a greater distance. An individual who doesn't have a lot of force but they can get to velocity quickly, so they have a high rate of force, they might need more weight sprints for shorter distances to improve their sprint because their velocity, they can maintain that velocity longer. So they don't need, the example of the first individual, higher forces for longer periods of time at a given load. Now you can see this will just rank them in terms of where they stand, right? Their absolute velocity, their force velocity in terms of horizontal, and then their load velocity profile and how they compare to other players. So obviously Les Spellman has a universal speed rating that he's used based off this formula. Ours is a little bit different, and I'm going to talk about that when we get into the nitty-gritty of our programming. But if you don't have access to a load velocity profile or a force velocity profile, you do not need to use this information, right? This information is going to be useless to you. You should establish key metrics that you're looking to monitor over time, and that is where you're going to check out our data section of the program. Lastly, our strength testing. So here's the deal. Make it as simple as possible. In a given assessment, you are not going to be able to do all the aforementioned things and then do a push-up or do a bench, a squat, and a deadlift, especially if this individual is an advanced individual who can press more than 300 pounds, they can squat more than 400, deadlift more than 500. You don't need to see a lot there to know that they have pretty high capacity and a good ability to train. So we've created a standard across the board that I don't care if you're a youth or if you're a pro athlete, all of these tests are still going to be relevant to you because I'm looking at, relative strength. So I'm looking at relative strength here. The push-up test, we're going to set it at a different hole out of a rig depending on where they are. Again, a novice, intermediate, advanced. Here I'm looking at that relative strength. Then they're going to do an inverted body weight row. It is the opposite. Same thing, I'm looking at capacity, I'm looking at relative strength. Are they novice, intermediate, advanced? And we performed a certain amount of reps that they'll be able to get per each of those. Now, a dumbbell goblet squat, right? We call work up to a relative 5 rep max. So if they can hit 10% of their body weight for 5 rep max, they're a novice. Intermediate is 25% and advanced is 50%. For example, if you're a 200 individual and you can hold a 100-pound dumbbell or a kettlebell and squat it for 5 reps, that's pretty advanced, even if you can deadlift 400, 500 pounds. Just the stability and the coordination and the intramuscular control to be able to do that is extremely important. So this is how you can categorize that across the board and know where this individual stands. Lastly is our dumbbell reverse lunge. This is a test that we use a lot because we truly believe in unilateral strength here. Remember, both bilateral and unilateral have their place, but we like to prioritize unilateral strength. So here we're working up to a 5 rep max. So I'm looking at 5 to 10% of their body weight. So if they're holding a dumbbell, we just do a traditional dumbbell reverse lunge. If they weigh 200 pounds and they have 25 pounds in each hand, that's 50 pounds, right? That's about 25% of their body weight. If they could do 50 pounds in each hand, that's about 50% of their body weight. If they weigh 200 pounds, that's 100 pounds of total load. You're an advanced athlete. Can you get better? Of course. But you're pretty capable of doing 100 pounds of unilateral work each side. Now, why does this all matter, right? You're looking at our lower body strength test. Well, we like to use lower body strength tests because here's another internal study that we ran of practical strength to weight ratio benefits. And part of this here is we have found, if you look at this graph, unilateral compound strength movements on the left-hand side, and then sports performance capacity. So this was a study performed by Schumo et al. In 2016, and then we utilized it over the last 2.5 years with our own data. And so that was very unique in the sense of we were allowed to see how well the study held up, but also how well it actually improved performance, and the results were pretty interesting. So if you look at the left-hand side, you have unilateral compound movements. This is in relation to your body weight. So 0.25 of your body weight, 0.5, 0.75, 1, 1.25, 1.50, and 2.0. So looking up here, right off the bat, I can kind of categorize you when I look down here in terms of what your capacity is. So now we have 3 columns, right? Strength deficit, strength association, strength reserve. We found that there were dramatic additional performance benefits when an individual could perform, or improve, I should say, their lower body total unilateral strength from 0.25 up to about 1 to 1.25 their body weight. So again, using the analogy of someone who is 200 pounds, if they could perform during their assessment 50 pounds in each hand, 100 pounds of total load in relation to their body weight, that is already 50%. So that's about, right, you look at 50%, that's about 1 time their body weight, or a little less, 0.5 times their body weight. So we know that if we improve up to 1 time their body weight, 100 pounds in each hand, that they're going to improve their speed performance. However, here is what was interesting over the course of 250 athletes. This was more our advanced athletes, our collegiate and professional athletes. We found for lower body unilateral movement specifically that improving from 125 to 1.50 to 2.0, there were no greater performance benefits in terms of maintaining their strength at that level was enough to help improve their speed by focusing on other qualities, whether that's the speed itself, resisted sprints, specific power variations, what have you. So that is something extremely important to take into consideration, because if we look here, we could say, okay, a dumbbell reverse lunge, this individual, 25% of their body weight. They're an intermediate. I look down here, 0.25% of their total body weight. Okay, I need to get this number to about 1.0 to 1.25, all the way back up to what we were talking about here, improving, right, their force strength. So if they have an RSI less than 2.0, we know that in getting their body weight strength unilaterally, not body weight strength, but getting that load up to 1.25, improving their force strength here is going to improve their speed, is going to improve their power. So there's a correlation between each, and this is why we test each of these things here, and it's extremely important. Now, something to take into consideration when dealing and looking at all these different testing parameters. How long does it take? Do I have the bandwidth to be able to do this, and can I teach it? I created these testing parameters and I've taught it to our staff. Now, it takes between 35 minutes, to an hour to perform all of these tests. It depends though on the individual's ability. It depends on, do they have any movement compensations? Have they not experienced enough stress where I can skip that part of the test? Now I know that this person's a youth or novice athlete. I'm not doing a force velocity profile. I am not doing a load velocity profile. I'm just looking at their ability to sprint, maybe timing a simple 10-yard sprint. I'm going to have them go through their strength parameters. It takes 30 minutes, maybe even less. So an assessment time is dependent on the individual that you are working with. Remember, it's important that you test with a purpose. Why are you testing all of these things? We test these 5 aforementioned principles because we are including them into our programming that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So they fit seamlessly into our training system. We're going to talk about this in our training model and training system lecture. But what do we do with this information, right? We categorize and ensure optimal rate of development. And now there's a separate video that we're going to talk about in our programming section that's not too long about what it means to truly be a novice, what it means to be an intermediate, and what it means to be an advanced individual. And now you can see here, I use the example of an intermediate athlete, taking them through our 13-week block principle. But if you look to the right, we created a VH6 standards. This is simple. This is what can be used and quantified no matter where you are. And that's what we're trying to bring to light here. If you don't have access to a load velocity profile or the technology to perform those tests, well then create standards for yourself. Here are ours. You create your 6 standards. And now if you're a novice, intermediate, advanced, here's where you fall with your upper body strength, your lower body strength, your relative test, a 15-yard sprint, a counter movement jump in miles per hour. So if you're a novice, your miles per hour is probably 15 through 15 yards, 15 miles per hour. In intermediate, 15 to 19 through 15 yards. In advanced is a 20 plus mile per hour. You're probably sprinting less than 2.3 in terms of seconds through that 15 yards. Counter movement jump, we're looking at 12 inches, 13 to 18, 18 plus. Again, this coincides with our reactive strength index. So this is our categorization of novice, intermediate, advanced, and this is why we utilize it. I want to see when someone comes in, this person's a novice, these are where they stand. Now, if we develop these or we can improve these standards, obviously along with all the other things, right? Because you have to remember, There's other things that go into just being a good athlete, as opposed to a bench, a squat, a push-up, a sprint time, and a miles per hour time. There's also, do they feel better? Do they look better? Can they move better? Those are kind of just other points of contention. But remember, we're trying to create a system when we teach our coaches and our interns when they come in, hey, look, this is where this athlete is. Here's how you should progress them through the entire training cycle, through the entire process. Because you don't want to skip steps in development. I don't want to have an individual come in and I think they're around here and I'm guessing and I'm having them perform exercises and programs that are more of a detriment because I'm skipping steps. I'm putting the cart before the horse.